One text to the mayor, judge. Sign it, or kissed your pension goodbye.
I have sat on this bench for 38 years. I have seen the hardest criminals break down in tears, and I have seen the innocent shake with fear. But nothing quite prepares you for the moment when a man looks you dead in the eye, smiles with utter contempt, and tells you that your ruling means absolutely nothing because he had dinner with the people who appointed you. That is exactly what happened on a bleak Tuesday morning. A day I thought would pass like any other, but ended with an empire crumbling right before my eyes. Are you ready to witness what happens when dirty money and political power slam into a wall of unshakable justice? Then hit that subscribe button right now because you are about to watch a confrontation that no law school could ever teach you. And trust me, you will want to be part of this community when I show you exactly how this ends. It was November 14th, 2023. My clerk placed case number 58CV2024 on my desk at exactly 8:55 inches the morning. On paper, it looked like a typical civil dispute, property damage and public disturbance. I took a sip of my coffee, figuring we would be done before the lunch break. I had no idea I was about to face a man who would test every ounce of patience and professional ethics I had built over nearly 4 decades of serving this community. The defendant walked into my courtroom shortly after 9, and immediately the atmosphere in the room shifted. His name was Sterling Vance, 34 years old, CEO of the real estate development giant, Vance Global. He wore a navy Brioni suit, the kind of bespoke tailoring that I know costs enough to feed a family for 6 months. His polished alligator shoes clicked against the hardwood floor as if he were walking a fashion runway, not a court of law. On his wrist was a Richard Mille watch that caught the fluorescent lights every time he smoothed back his meticulously groomed hair. Walking beside him was not just any lawyer, but Harrison Fordman, the head of one of the city's most powerful firms, a man nicknamed the Great White Shark because he had never lost a land zoning case. But it was the victim who made my heart tighten the moment I saw him. His name was Elias Thorne, 68 years old. He sat in the front row, his calloused, grease-stained hands twisting an old, worn-out baseball cap. Elias was the owner of a small mechanic shop in the old district, Thorne's Auto, which had stood there for over 40 years. It wasn't just a livelihood, it was his life. He wore a faded plaid shirt, the best one he owned, but it couldn't hide the exhaustion and desperation in his sunken eyes. Elias had lost his wife 2 years ago, and the shop was all he had left to support his grandson who was in college. But today, he stood on the brink of losing everything because of the bottomless greed of the man standing and smirking at the defendant's table. The case stemmed from Sterling Vance's new skyscraper project right next door to Elias's shop. To rush the schedule for a grand opening attended by city officials, Sterling had ordered his crews to work through the night, violating every noise ordinance on the books. Worse, their reckless excavation had cracked the load-bearing wall of the auto shop, causing a partial ceiling collapse that destroyed 3 lifts and injured one of Elias's employees. Instead of compensation or repairs, what did Sterling Vance do? He had his lawyers send threatening letters, forcing Elias to sell the land at a rock-bottom price or face a countersuit for obstructing construction progress. Elias had been forced to close his shop for 2 months. No income, no money for repairs. He was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Sterling Vance stepped out of his Bentley this morning without a shred of remorse. Security camera footage captured Sterling directing workers to pile debris to block the entrance to Elias's shop, laughing as he spoke into his phone. Just do it. That old man can't do a thing. I bought this whole block. He didn't see Elias as a human being. He saw him as an obstacle to be cleared away. I looked down at Sterling and asked him to approach the bench. I said, "Mr. Vance, I have read the forensic report. Your illegal construction activities have destroyed Mr. Thorne's business. He has lost income for the last 60 days. Do you have anything to say?" Sterling Vance didn't even bother to look at me. He was busy texting on his phone. He sighed, slid the phone into his breast pocket with agonizing slowness, and then looked up with the most bored expression I have ever seen. He said, "Your Honor, with all due respect," or whatever you want to call it. My lawyer already gave him a number. The old man refused out of greed. This is business, not an emotional issue. I have a board meeting at 11, so can we wrap this up quickly? I felt my jaw tighten. I said, wrap this up quickly? You have destroyed an honest man's livelihood, and you are worried about your meeting? His lawyer tried to jump in immediately. Your Honor, my client merely wishes to emphasize that we attempted to settle. But Sterling raised a hand to silence his own lawyer. He looked straight at me, his eyes cold and full of challenge. He said, listen, old man, I know who you are. Judge Boyd, right? You're close to retirement. Don't make this difficult. I have the mayor on speed dial right here in this pocket. We just had dinner last night. Are you sure you want to turn this little courtroom drama into a problem for your pension? The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear the clerk's heart pounding. Elias bowed his head, trembling. He had just openly threatened me in my own courtroom. He thought political connections could buy justice, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The silence in that courtroom was heavy. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bomb about to go off. My bailiff, Tommy, who is 6'4" and served 2 tours in the Marines, actually took a step forward, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. He looked at me, waiting for a signal, but I didn't give one, not yet. Harrison Fordman, the so-called great white shark of legal defense, looked like he had just swallowed a hook, his face drained of color. He knew. He knew exactly what line his client had just crossed. In 40 years of practice, Fordman had probably bribed, negotiated, and maneuvered his way out of everything, but he had never been stupid enough to threaten a sitting judge on the record. He jumped to his feet, his voice cracking slightly. Your Honor, my client strikes that comment. He is under immense stress due to the project deadline. He did not mean to imply. I meant every word, Sterling interrupted, not even looking at his lawyer. He was still looking at me, that smug grin plastered on his face like he was waiting for me to apologize to him. He tapped his phone screen with a manicured finger. I just sent the text. Boyd, the mayor is going to be very interested to hear how you are obstructing the biggest economic development project this city has seen in a decade. You might want to update your resume. I leaned back in my chair. I took a slow breath. I didn't look at the phone. I looked at Elias Thorne. The old mechanic was gripping the wooden railing in front of him so hard his knuckles were white. He looked terrified, not for himself, but for me. He thought he had brought trouble to my door. He thought his little lawsuit was going to cost me my career. That is the difference between men like Elias and men like Sterling. Elias worries about others, Sterling worries about his timeline. I lowered my reading glasses and looked Sterling dead in the eye. I spoke softly. You learn early on the bench that the quieter you get, the more people listen. Mr. Vance, I said, you seem to be under the impression that this is a boardroom negotiation where you can bully your way to a deal. Let me correct you. This is a court of law, and in this room, the only speed dial that matters is the one to the county sheriff. Sterling laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Cute, he said. Really cute. But let's get real. I have $300 million tied up in that building next door. Every hour this old man's shack stands there, I lose $10,000. So, here is the offer. We pay him $50,000. He packs up his grease rags and leaves. Today. And if you sign off on it now, I might forget to tell the mayor about your little attitude problem. $50,000. Elias's shop, the land alone, was worth $500,000 in that district. But it wasn't about the money. I turned to Elias. Mr. Thorne, I said gently, Mr. Vance has made an offer, $50,000 to walk away from 40 years of your life. What do you say? Elias stood up slowly. His legs were shaking. He looked at Sterling, then at me. His voice was raspy, thick with the dust of a lifetime of hard work. Your Honor, he said, it ain't about the money. My wife, Martha, she planted the rose bushes out front the day we opened in 1982. Her ashes are scattered in the garden behind the garage. If I sell, if they bulldoze it, it's like losing her all over again. I promised her I'd keep the lights on for our grandson. Sterling Vance rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. He groaned loudly, throwing his hands up. Oh God, here we go with the sob story. Roses? Are you serious? I am building a monument to the future of this city? And we are talking about dead roses? He turned to Elias, pointing a finger at him. Listen, Pops, your wife is dead. The roses are dead. And if you don't take the check, your business is dead too. Stop being sentimental and start being realistic. You are standing in the way of progress. I saw the tears well up in Elias's eyes, but he didn't look away. He stood his ground. But Sterling wasn't done. He turned back to me, checking his watch again. Judge, are we done here? The mayor just read my text. He's typing back. I suggest you make a ruling before your phone starts ringing. I smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind of smile I give right before I drop the hammer. You know, Mr. Vance, I said, I am glad you brought up your phone because while you were busy texting the mayor, my clerk handed me a piece of evidence that your lawyer tried very hard to suppress this morning. It seems you didn't just ignore the noise ordinances. You sent a very interesting email to your construction foreman on the night Mr. Thorne's shop collapsed. Sterling's face froze. For the first time, the arrogance flickered. Fordman, his lawyer, stood up, panic in his eyes. Objection! Your Honor, that email is privileged communication. It was not meant for... Overruled. I cut him off. Mr. Vance, would you like to read this email to the court? Or shall I? Sterling stayed silent. He wasn't smiling anymore. I picked up the paper. It is dated October 12th, 3 a.m. Subject line, the Thorne problem. The email reads, I don't care about the permits. Just dig the trench deeper. If the old man's wall collapses, oops, accidents happen. It will be cheaper to pay the fine than to wait for him to sell. Bring it down. The courtroom gasped. This wasn't negligence anymore. This was a calculated attack. I looked at Sterling. You didn't just damage his property. Mr. Vance, you ordered a hit on his livelihood. And you did it while bragging about your political connections. Sterling's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. He slammed his hand on the defense table. This is entrapment. You obtained that illegally. I am calling the mayor right now. He actually pulled his phone out and hit the call button. He put it to his ear, glaring at me. You are finished, Boyd. You hear me? Finished. Put the phone down, I ordered. No, he shouted. Hello? Mr. Mayor? Yes, it's Sterling. You need to get down to the courthouse right now. This judge is out of control. He is. And that is when the doors to the back of the courtroom swung open. The heavy oak doors swung open, hitting the back wall with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. Every head in the courtroom turned. Sterling Vance spun around in his chair, a triumphant grin already spreading across his face. He held his phone up like a trophy, convinced that his cavalry had arrived to rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. And indeed, standing in the doorway was Mayor Richard Gallo. He was flanked by two men in dark suits and the county sheriff. Sterling actually laughed out loud. He pointed his phone at me and shouted, I told you I make one call and things happen. Now, Judge, get ready to apologize. Sterling turned to the mayor, opening his arms wide. Bob, thank God you're here. This senile judge is trying to hold up the Skylight project over some cracked drywall. Tell him how important this launch is for your re-election campaign. I watched Mayor Gallo's face. I have known Richard Gallo for 20 years. I swore him into office. I know the look of a man in charge, and I know the look of a man who is terrified that his career is about to go up in flames. Today, he looked like a man watching a burning building and trying to make sure he wasn't inside. He didn't smile at Sterling. He didn't walk over to shake his hand. He kept his hands clasped tightly in front of him and walked straight to the prosecution table, not the defense. Sterling's grin faltered. Bob, what are you doing over there? Mayor Gallo cleared his throat. He looked at me, avoiding Sterling's eyes completely. Your Honor, the mayor said, his voice tight. I was in the building meeting with the district attorney when I was informed that my name was being invoked in your courtroom to intimidate a sitting judge. I am here to state for the record that the City of Providence does not condone the destruction of private property, nor do we interfere in judicial proceedings. You could hear the air leave Sterling's lungs. It was the sound of a man realizing his golden parachute had just been cut. What? Sterling stammered. What are you talking about? We had dinner last night. We toasted to the permits. You said, I said, the city supports development. The mayor cut him off sharply, sweat beading on his forehead. Legal development. Mr. Vance, if you violated construction codes or harmed Mr. Thorne's business, that is entirely on you. Do not drag my administration into your mess. I leaned forward. This was the moment. The shark was in the water, but he was bleeding, and his own allies were circling. It seems, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, that your speed dial isn't working the way you thought it would, Mr. Vance. The mayor has just clarified his position. So, let's go back to that email. The one where you ordered the destruction of Mr. Thorne's shop. Sterling looked from the mayor to me, and then back to the mayor. His face went from pale to a deep, violent purple. The betrayal was too much for his ego to handle. He snapped. He threw his phone onto the table, a loud crack that made everyone jump. You coward, Sterling screamed at the mayor. You spineless coward. You took my donation. You took the $50,000 for your legal defense fund last month. You told me to bulldoze the old man if he wouldn't sell. You said, just get it done, Sterling. I'll handle the inspectors. The entire courtroom gasped. The mayor's eyes went wide. The press gallery in the back row started typing furiously. Sterling Vance, in his arrogance and rage, had just confessed to bribery and conspiracy on open court record. I signaled the court reporter. Are you getting this? She nodded, her fingers flying across the keys. Mr. Vance, I said calmly, though my heart was racing. You just admitted to bribing a public official and conspiring to bypass safety inspectors. Do you realize what you have just done? Sterling was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He pointed a shaking finger at the mayor. If I go down, Bob, you are coming with me. I have the recordings. I record everything. Every meeting, every promise, every dirty deal. Harrison Fordman, his lawyer, finally found his voice. He practically tackled his own client. Shut up. Sterling, shut up right now. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Your Honor, my client is... He is distraught. He is speaking out of anger. These are not facts. They sounded like facts to me, I said. And they sounded like facts to the sheriff standing right behind the mayor. The sheriff stepped forward. He wasn't looking at the mayor. He was looking at Sterling. But Sterling wasn't done digging his grave. He pushed his lawyer away and straightened his jacket. He tried to regain that composure, that icy arrogance, but it was cracked now. It doesn't matter, Sterling spat. None of this matters. I have the best lawyers in the country. We will bury this court in paperwork for 10 years. That old man will be dead before he sees a dime. And you, Judge, I will spend every penny I have to make sure you are investigated, audited, and removed. You picked the wrong fight. I looked at Elias Thorne. He wasn't shaking anymore. He was watching Sterling with a strange look, not fear, but pity. He saw a man with everything losing it all because he couldn't find an ounce of decency in his soul. I picked up my gavel. I didn't bang it. I just held it, feeling the weight of the wood, the weight of the authority vested in me. Mr. Vance, I said, you have threatened a judge. You have admitted to bribery. You have admitted to willful destruction of property. And you have just promised to weaponize the legal system to abuse an elderly victim further. I looked at the sheriff. Sheriff, please secure the doors. No one leaves. Then I looked back at Sterling. You said your lawyer gave Mr. Thorne a number. $50,000. Well, I have a number for you too. I opened the thick law book on my desk. I didn't need to read it. I knew the statutes by heart, but I wanted him to see the book. I wanted him to see the law he thought he was above. But before I give you that number, I said, I have one question. You said you record everything. Is that true? Sterling sneered. Everything. Cloud backup. Encryption. You'll never touch it. Thank you, I said, because you just gave me the probable cause I needed. I turned to the sheriff. Sheriff, take Mr. Vance into custody and seize his phone as evidence in an active criminal conspiracy investigation. Sterling's eyes bulged. You can't do that. This is a civil trial. Not anymore, I said. The click of handcuffs is a unique sound. In my 38 years on the bench, I have heard it thousands of times. Usually, it is a sound of finality, of an end to a long, tragic road. But today, in this courtroom, it sounded like the first crack of thunder, before a storm that was going to wash away half the city administration. Sterling Vance stared at the metal cuffs around his wrists as if they were alien objects. He tried to pull his arms apart, but the sheriff held him firm. The man who 10 minutes ago was checking his Richard Mille watch and bragging about his dinner reservations was now being restrained like a common brawler. "Get your hands off me," Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I pay your salary. I built half the precinct you work in." He whipped his head around, looking frantically for the mayor. Bob, tell him to let me go. Fix this right now." I watched Mayor Richard Gallo. This was the moment of truth. A man of honor would have stepped forward, admitted his mistake, or at least tried to de-escalate the situation with dignity. But politicians like Gallo don't survive by having honor. They survive by knowing when to cut the rope. The mayor took a step back, physically distancing himself from the defendant's table. He adjusted his tie, looking not at Sterling, but at the cameras in the back of the room. "Officer," the mayor said, his voice loud enough for the press to hear clearly, "remove this man. He is disturbing the peace of the court. And for the record, I have never taken a bribe from Mr. Vance. Any donations to my campaign were legal and public. If he is suggesting otherwise, he is a liar and a criminal." Sterling's jaw dropped. The betrayal was absolute. "A liar?" he screamed. "I have the Venmo receipts, Bob. I have the emails. You sent me the zoning codes before they were public. You told me which inspector to pay off. That is enough." I slammed my gavel down. The sound cut through the chaos. "Sheriff, remove the defendant to the holding cell. Seize his phone and bag it immediately. Chain of custody starts now. I want a forensic tech on that device within the hour." "You can't do this," Sterling yelled as the sheriff began to drag him toward the side door. "Fordman, do something. Earn your money." Harrison Fordman, the great white shark, looked like he had washed up on the beach. He was packing his briefcase with trembling hands. He didn't look at Sterling. He looked at me. "Your Honor," Fordman stammered. "In light of recent revelations and the potential conflict of interest regarding criminal allegations, I must move to withdraw as counsel immediately. I cannot represent a client who is actively implicating himself in federal crimes against my advice." I leaned over the bench. "Motion denied. Mr. Fordman, you are the attorney of record. You don't get to jump off the ship just because it hit an iceberg you helped steer it toward. You will sit down. You will represent your client until a public defender can be appointed or until he hires new counsel. But you are not leaving this room." Fordman slumped into his chair. He knew he was trapped. The side door slammed shut, silencing Sterling's screams. The heavy silence returned to the courtroom, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of shock. The kind of silence you get after a car crash when the wheels are still spinning. I turned my attention to the gallery. The reporters were typing so fast I thought I could hear their keyboards smoking. The mayor was still standing there, looking like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. "Mr. Mayor," I said, "you may leave, but I suggest you don't go far." Based on what was just shouted on the record, I imagine the district attorney will have quite a few questions for you this afternoon. The mayor nodded stiffly, turned on his heel, and walked out without a word. His entourage scrambled after him. The air in the room instantly felt lighter. I looked down at Elias Thorne. He hadn't moved. He was still standing at the plaintiff's table, clutching his hat. He looked at the empty spot where Sterling had been standing, then up at me. He looked confused, like a man who had prepared for a funeral and found himself at a wedding. "Mr. Thorne," I said softly, "are you all right?" Elias blinked, tears finally spilling onto his cheeks. "Judge, I just wanted my roof fixed. I didn't want to all this. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life. That is the heart of a good man. Even after everything Sterling did to him, the insults, the destruction, the threats, Elias still felt the weight of another man's downfall. You didn't ruin his life, Elias, I told him. He did that all by himself. You just turned on the lights. And when you turn on the lights, the roaches scatter. You stood your ground. That is all you did. I looked at the court clerk. We still have a civil matter to conclude. The defendant is in custody, but his legal representative is present. Mr. Fordman Since your client is indisposed, and since he effectively admitted to the liability on the record before his arrest, are you prepared to discuss damages? Or do you want to continue arguing that the destruction of Mr. Thorne's shop was an accident? Fordman stood up slowly. He looked defeated. Your Honor, the defense. The defense concedes liability. We are prepared to discuss settlement. Good, I said, because the number just went up. But before we get to the money, there is something else. Something money can't buy. I opened the file on my desk again. I pulled out a photograph Elias had submitted into evidence. It was a picture of his shop before the damage. In front of the garage bay, there was a small garden with bright red rose bushes. Mr. Fordman, I said, your client called these dead roses. He called this case a waste of time. He thought he could bulldoze a man's memory because he had a skyscraper to build. Well, I have news for you. That skyscraper isn't getting built. I am issuing an immediate injunction halting all construction on the Vance Global site pending a full safety and environmental review. I looked at Elias. Mr. Thorne, you asked for $50,000 to repair your shop, but based on the defendant's own admission of willful malice, I am adding punitive damages. Mr. Fordman, you will write a check today, and it won't be for $50,000. I picked up my pen. We are going to make sure Mr. Thorne can rebuild, and we are going to make sure that every time Sterling Vance looks out of his jail cell window, he remembers the name Elias Thorne. Harrison Fordman looked at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. The man who charged $1,000 an hour for his legal advice was suddenly speechless. He pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his jacket, but his hand hovered over the checkbook like it was made of lead. Your Honor, Fordman said, his voice barely a whisper. $50,000 was the initial offer. My client, before he was detained, authorized me to go up to 75. But punitive damages? On a property claim? The precedent usually caps that at 3 times the actual damages. I leaned back in my chair. Mr. Fordman, normally you would be right, but your client stood right there and told me that every hour Mr. Thorne's shop stands, he loses $10,000. He put a price on his own impatience. He quantified his own greed. So, let's use his math. I picked up a calculator from my desk. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the buttons clicking. Mr. Thorne has been forced to close his shop for 60 days. That is 1,440 hours. If we use Mr. Vance's own valuation of time, well, the number gets very large, very quickly. But I am a reasonable man. I won't charge him for every hour of the day, just the business hours. I looked at Elias. Mr. Thorne, you work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Is that right? Elias nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Sometimes 12. Since Martha passed, I like to stay busy. 60 hours a week, I said. For 8 weeks. That is 480 hours. Multiplied by the $10,000 an hour Mr. Vance claimed his time was worth. Fordman's eyes widened behind his glasses. He did the math in his head. Your Honor, that is $4,800,000, I said calmly. A collective gasp swept through the room. The reporters in the back row stopped typing and just stared. $4.8 million. For a mechanic shop that barely made $50,000 a year, it was an astronomical sum. Fordman stood up, knocking his chair over. Your Honor, that is exorbitant. That is bankruptcy. The Vance Global Corporation cannot liquidate that kind of cash for a nuisance suit. We will appeal. We will take this to the Supreme Court. Sit down, Mr. Fordman, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I haven't finished. Fordman froze. He sat down slowly, looking like a man who had just realized the trapdoor beneath him was still opening. You are right, I said. 4.8 million might be excessive for lost time. However, we haven't discussed the roses. You see, Mr. Vance called them dead roses. He mocked the memory of a dead woman. He treated emotional sanctity as an obstacle to his profit. I looked at Elias. Mr. Thorne, how long did you and Martha tend that garden? Elias looked down at his hands. 42 years, Your Honor. She planted them because she said a garage didn't have to be ugly. She wanted it to smell like life, not just oil. When she got sick, when the cancer got bad, she used to sit in a chair by the bay door just to watch them bloom. She made me promise not to let them die. Elias wiped a tear from his cheek with his dirty sleeve. I failed her, Judge. I let them crush it. You didn't fail anyone, I said firmly. And that is why the number stands. I turned back to Fordman. Mr. Fordman, I am entering a judgment against Sterling Vance and Vance Global in the amount of $5 million, $4.8 million in punitive damages for willful, malicious destruction of property and conspiracy to bypass city safety codes, and $200,000 for the emotional distress inflicted upon Mr. Thorne. Fordman opened his mouth to protest again, but I held up a finger, and I added, I am ordering that the check be certified and delivered to this court by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. If it is not, I will instruct the sheriff to seize the construction equipment currently sitting on the lot next door. Those cranes are worth about $2 million each, aren't they? I imagine Mr. Thorne could sell them for scrap and make a tidy profit. Fordman slumped. He knew he was beaten. With his client in jail on federal bribery charges, the assets would be frozen soon anyway. Paying this judgment now was the only way to stop me from seizing the physical equipment immediately. It was a checkmate. I will make the call, Your Honor, Fordman whispered. I looked at Elias. He was shaking his head, looking at me with disbelief. Judge, $5 million. I don't know what to say. I don't need that much. I just wanted my roof fixed. It isn't about the roof anymore, Elias, I told him. It is about the message. It is about making sure that men like Sterling Vance know that the price of dignity has gone up. You take that money, you fix your roof, you replant Martha's roses, and you send your grandson to medical school or law school or wherever he wants to go. You secure your family's future. Elias buried his face in his hands and wept. It wasn't the quiet crying of a hopeless man anymore. It was the release of a man who had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and just felt it lift. But the story didn't end there. Just as Fordman was packing his briefcase to leave, my clerk handed me another note. This one wasn't from the sheriff. It was from the news. Mr. Fordman, I said, before you leave to call your bank, you might want to check the news. It seems someone in this courtroom, perhaps one of these fine reporters, live-streamed Mr. Vance's confession about the mayor. Fordman pulled out his phone. His face went gray. Oh no. What is it? I asked, though I already knew. The governor just announced a press conference, Fordman read, his voice trembling. He is appointing a special prosecutor to investigate corruption in City Hall. The mayor's office is being raided by the state police right now. I smiled. It seems justice travels fast these days. Court is adjourned. I banged the gavel. It was the loudest sound I had ever made in that room. As I walked back to my chambers, I didn't feel tired. I felt energized. I took off my robe and sat in my leather chair, looking out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Sterling Vance was being processed, trading his Brioni suit for an orange jumpsuit. Somewhere out there, the mayor was shredding documents. And somewhere out there, Elias Thorne was walking out of the courthouse, a free man, a rich man, but most importantly, a respected man. But there was one final twist waiting for me, a knock on my chamber door. It wasn't my clerk. It was someone I hadn't expected to see. I opened the door. Standing there was a man I hadn't seen in 10 years, but I recognized the silhouette instantly. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his silver hair thin by age, but his eyes were as sharp as cut glass. It was Arthur Vance, Sterling's father, the founder of Vance Global, the man who had actually built this city skyline, brick by honest brick, before handing the keys to his son 3 years ago. Judge Boyd, Arthur said, his voice raspy. May I come in? I stepped aside. Mr. Vance, if you are here to plead for your son or to threaten me with more lawyers, I suggest you save your breath. The ink on the judgment is already dry. Arthur slowly made his way to the chair opposite my desk. He sat down with a groan that sounded like old timbers settling. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the profound sadness of a father who knows he has failed in the most important job of his life. I didn't come to plead, Arthur said. And I certainly didn't come to threaten. I came to thank you. I paused, my hand resting on the back of my chair. Thank me? I just sentenced your son to a federal holding cell, and find your company $5 million. Most fathers would be calling for my head. Arthur tapped his cane on the floor. Sterling isn't the man I raised, Judge. Or maybe he is exactly the man I raised, and I was just too busy building towers to notice I was forgetting to build his character. He reached into his jacket pocket. I tensed, half expecting a subpoena or a bribe. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked familiar. You were wondering where your clerk got that email this morning, Arthur said quietly. The one proving Sterling ordered the destruction of Mr. Thorne's shop. I stared at him. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. The suppression hearing, the sudden appearance of the smoking gun evidence. You sent it? I asked. You leaked your own son's incriminating email to my court? Arthur nodded slowly. I still have administrative access to the company servers. I saw what he was doing. I saw the bribes to the mayor. I saw the pressure he was putting on that poor mechanic. I tried to talk to him, Judge. I told him that Vance Global doesn't destroy the little guy. We build for them. He laughed at me. He told me I was a dinosaur. He said, "This is how the game is played now, Dad. Get with the times or get out of the way." Arthur's voice broke. When he threatened you today, when he said he had the mayor on speed dial, I was watching the live stream. I knew I had to stop him. Before he destroyed not just the company, but the soul of this family. The room was silent. Here was a titan of industry, a man worth billions, confessing that he had to destroy his son's career to save his own conscience. Mr. Vance, I said, sitting down, that took a lot of courage, but it doesn't change the judgment. $5 million, and the criminal charges are out of my hands now. I know, Arthur said. I spoke to the bank before I came up here. The funds are being wired to the court's escrow account as we speak. Mr. Thorne won't have to wait until tomorrow. He will have his money today. He looked out the window, toward the jail where his son was currently being booked. Sterling needs this, Judge. He needs to hit rock bottom. He has never faced a consequence money couldn't fix. Maybe. Just maybe. A few years in a federal prison will teach him what I couldn't. Arthur stood up, wincing in pain. There is one more thing. The mayor. What about him? I asked. Sterling wasn't bluffing about the recordings, Arthur said. But he's stupid. He kept them on a cloud server that the feds will take months to decrypt. I have the physical backups in my safe, hard drives, audio, video, everything. He placed a small key on my desk. That opens a safe deposit box at First National, Arthur said. Give it to the special prosecutor. If my son is going down, he isn't going alone. That mayor has been bleeding this city dry for 5 years. It's time to clean house. I looked at the key. It was heavy, cold metal. This wasn't just evidence. It was the nail in the coffin of a corrupt administration. Why give it to me? I asked. Arthur smiled, a sad, weary smile. Because you're the only man in this city Sterling couldn't buy, and because you fought for a mechanic when everyone else told you to look the other way. He turned to the door. Goodbye, Judge. I have a company to salvage and a grandson, Sterling's boy, who needs to learn how to lay bricks before he learns how to sign checks. Arthur Vance walked out, leaving me alone with the key to the city's darkest secrets. I sat there for a long time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my office. I had started the day thinking it was just another property dispute. I was ending it, holding the fate of the mayor in my hand. I picked up the phone to call the district attorney, but before I could dial, my clerk burst in. She looked frantic. Judge, you need to come back to the courtroom right now. What is it? I asked, standing up. Is it Sterling? No, she said, breathless. It's Mr. Thorne. He collapsed in the hallway. My heart stopped. Elias, the stress, the shock of the verdict. I ran. I ran faster than a man of my age should be able to run. I burst into the hallway to see a crowd gathered around a figure on the floor. I pushed through the circle of court officers and reporters. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a gavel striking wood. There, on the cold marble floor of the courthouse hallway, lay Elias Thorne. His old baseball cap had fallen off, revealing the thinning gray hair of a man who had carried the weight of the world for too long. A paramedic was already kneeling beside him, cutting open his plaid shirt. "Give him air!" the medic shouted. "Back up! Everyone, back up!" I dropped to my knees beside him, not caring about the creak in my own joints or the stain on my robe. "Elias," I said, my voice shaking. "Elias, can you hear me?" His eyes were closed. His chest was heaving, shallow and fast. For a terrifying second, I thought the justice we had just delivered had come too late. I thought Sterling Vance had killed him, not with a bulldozer, but with stress. Then his eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused, but they found mine. His hand, rough like sandpaper and trembling, reached out and gripped my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Judge," he wheezed. Did they stop the machines?" I squeezed his hand. "They stopped, Elias. The engines are off. The cranes aren't moving. You did it." A weak smile spread across his face, even as the color drained from it. "Martha's roses," he whispered. "They're safe. Sir, we need to move him," the paramedic said urgently. "His blood pressure is through the roof. It looks like extreme exhaustion combined with a minor cardiac event. We need to get him to St. Mary's immediately." I stood up as they loaded him onto the stretcher. "I'm coming with him," I said. "Your Honor," my clerk interrupted, holding a phone. "You can't. The district attorney is on line 1, and the special prosecutor is waiting in your chambers. They know about the key." I looked at Elias as the ambulance crew wheeled him toward the elevator. He gave me a small thumbs up. He was a fighter. He would make it. But I had one more fight to finish for him. "Tell the DA to meet me in my chambers in 5 minutes," I told my clerk. "And call the hospital. Tell them Mr. Thorne is a ward of the court. Private room, best specialists, bill everything to the court's discretionary fund. I don't want him seeing a single invoice." I walked back into my office. Sitting there was Special Prosecutor Elena Ross. She was known as the Butcher of State Street because when she prosecuted corruption cases, she didn't just win, she dismantled organizations. "Judge Boyd," she said, standing up, "I heard you had an interesting visitor." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver key Arthur Vance had given me. It felt heavier now, burdened with the sins of a father and the crimes of a mayor. "Arthur Vance left this," I said, placing it on the desk. "He said it opens a box at First National. He said it contains the backups his son was too arrogant to delete." Elena picked up the key with a gloved hand, dropping it into an evidence bag. "If this is what I think it is, Your Honor, you just handed us the entire city administration." "Go," I said. "Get the warrant. Open the box." "And Elena?" "Don't miss." She smiled. A sharp, dangerous smile. "I never miss." 2 hours later, I was sitting in the hospital waiting room. The doctors said Elias was stable, just stress and dehydration. He was sleeping. The TV in the corner of the waiting room was tuned to the local news channel. Mayor Richard Gallo was holding an emergency press conference on the steps of City Hall. He looked sweaty, his tie loosened, trying to project strength but radiating panic. "These allegations are baseless," Gallo shouted into the microphones. "This is a political witch hunt orchestrated by a rogue judge and a disgruntled businessman. I have served this city with honor. I will not step down. I will not." Suddenly, the camera angle shifted. The feed cut to a wide shot. 4 black SUVs screeched to a halt at the bottom of the stairs. Agents in windbreakers with FBI printed in yellow letters poured out. The mayor stopped mid-sentence. He looked down the stairs. The color left his face so fast he looked like a ghost. Leading the agents was Elena Ross. She walked up the stairs, right past the stunned security detail. She stepped up to the podium, right next to the mayor, and spoke into the microphones he had just been using. "Richard Gallo," she said, her voice calm and amplified across the entire city. "You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bribery, and obstruction of justice." The mayor tried to run. He actually turned and tried to scramble back toward the doors of City Hall. But 2 agents were already there. They grabbed him, spun him around, and slapped the cuffs on him. The camera zoomed in. It wasn't the dignified surrender of a statesman. It was a pathetic struggle. Gallo was shouting, "Do you know who I am? I am the mayor." "Not anymore," Elena said. I watched as they shoved him into the back of an SUV. The same man who, just hours ago, Sterling Vance claimed to have on speed dial. The speed dial worked, all right. It just dialed the wrong number. I turned off the TV. The silence in the waiting room was peaceful. A nurse walked out. Judge, Mr. Thorne is awake. He's asking for you. I walked into the room. Elias was sitting up, sipping water. He looked better. The fear was gone from his eyes. I saw the news, Elias said quietly. They got him. The mayor. They got him, I confirmed. And Sterling Vance is currently being transferred to a federal detention center. He won't be seeing daylight for a long time. Elias. Elias looked out the window at the city lights. You know, Judge, when he threatened you, when he said he'd ruin your career, I was so scared. Not for me, but for you. Why did you do it? You could have just let him pay me off. You could have retired in peace. I pulled a chair up next to his bed. Elias, let me tell you something about retirement. It's only peaceful if you can look at yourself in the mirror. If I had let him buy his way out, if I had let him bulldoze your life because he had a fancy suit and a powerful friend, I would never have slept again. I reached into my robe pocket. I was still wearing it over my suit and pulled out a piece of paper. It was the confirmation of the wire transfer. $5 million, Elias, I said, handing it to him. It's in your account. It's done. Elias took the paper. His hands shook, but this time it wasn't from fear. It's too much, he whispered. I don't need castles, Judge. I just fix cars. Then fix cars, I smiled. But fix them knowing that nobody, not a CEO, not a mayor, not a king, can ever tell you that you don't belong on that corner. You bought your dignity back, Elias. I just signed the receipt. We sat there for a moment, two old men from different worlds, united by a single Tuesday that changed everything. But the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. Just as I stood up to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a picture of me walking into the hospital. And the caption read, "You think you won? You just started a war you can't finish. Watch your back, Judge." I stared at the screen. Sterling was in jail. The mayor was in cuffs. Arthur Vance was cooperating. Who was left? I looked at the text message again. A lesser man might have felt a chill run down his spine. A younger man might have looked over his shoulder. But I am neither. I am a judge who just took down a political machine with a single gavel strike. I didn't delete the text. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Special Prosecutor Elena Ross. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was Elena. Her message was short. We traced the burner phone. It pinged from the parking lot of the courthouse. It's Harrison Fordman. He's sitting in his car, drunk, trying to scare you into a mistrial. We're picking him up now for witness intimidation. I let out a laugh. A deep, genuine laugh that startled a nurse walking by. Harrison Fordman, the great white shark, reduced to sending anonymous threats from a burner phone because he knew his career was over. The war wasn't starting. The war was already won. They were just too arrogant to realize they had surrendered. 6 months later, it was a Tuesday in May. The winter gray had finally lifted from Providence, replaced by the vibrant green of spring. I drove my old Buick down to the historic district, not to the courthouse, but to a small street corner that had been the center of so much pain. The construction site next door was silent. The cranes were gone, sold off to pay the fines. The half-dug foundation of Sterling Vance's skyscraper was being filled in to make way for a community park, part of the settlement agreement Arthur Vance had insisted on. But right next to it, Thorne's auto was buzzing with life. The wall was repaired, stronger than before. The sign had been repainted. And there, lining the front of the garage bay, were the roses, Martha's roses. They were in full bloom, a riot of red and pink that smelled like victory. Elias was under the hood of a sedan when I walked up. He looked 10 years younger. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over, a smile splitting his face. "Judge," Elias called out, "I didn't think you'd come. I needed an oil change," I lied. "And I heard this is the only honest shop in town." Elias laughed. "For you, it's on the house. But you know, I can't take your money. I have too much of it as it is." He wasn't joking. Elias had taken the $5 million, repaired his shop, and then done something that made the local papers for weeks. He established the Martha Thorne Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to helping small business owners fight against corporate bullying. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't buy a yacht. He bought justice for others. How is the grandson? I asked. Top of his class, Elias beamed, and he switched majors. He's studying environmental law, says he wants to be like the judge who saved his grandpa. We stood there for a moment, watching the city move around us. It felt different, lighter. And Sterling? Elias asked quietly. Sentenced yesterday, I said. 12 years, federal, no parole. The mayor got 15. And Harrison Fordman was disbarred and is serving 2 years for obstruction. Elias nodded slowly. 12 years. He'll be 46 when he gets out. He'll have time to think, I said. Time to realize that a speed dial doesn't work when there's nobody left to answer the phone. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror. I saw Elias waving, framed by those resilient, beautiful roses. He was the embodiment of everything the law is supposed to protect. I have seen a lot in my 43 years on the bench. I have seen the worst of humanity, the greed, the arrogance, the cruelty, but I have also seen the best. I have seen that when you strip away the expensive suits and the political titles, the truth has a weight that no amount of money can lift. Sterling Vance thought he was untouchable because he knew the mayor. He forgot that in a courtroom, you don't need to know the mayor. You just need to know the difference between right and wrong. He told me his lawyer cost more than my life. He was wrong. My life is worth the peace of mind I have right now. My life is worth the knowledge that Elias Thorne is safe. My life is worth the oath I took to serve the people, not the powerful. And what about you? When you see injustice in your life, at work, in your neighborhood, in the news, do you look away because you think you're too small to make a difference? Do you stay silent because you're afraid of the Sterling Vances of the world? Don't be. Because power isn't about who you know, it's about who you are. If this story reminded you that justice is still alive, if it gave you a little bit of hope, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Join this community, because we aren't just telling stories here. We are reminding the world that dignity is not for sale. I'm Judge Boyd, and court is adjourned.